Well, happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I just finished a 3-hour self-care hike where I got lost, and then Adriel had to come pick me up because I was running late to this meeting.
I've been there before, the like overly optimistic, like walk, hike, where you're like, I can make it back.
Time. Good.
No,
Like I got here early. I have like 2.5 hours to do this. Yeah, let's do this hike all the way to the Griffith Observatory and back, and then get lost on the way down. And I'm like, wait, what? I don't have time.
yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. Just chilling. I had a little buddy, but I think she's hiding.
Oh, Buddy's like, I'm done for the day.
Yeah, she was like, actually, it's been a really long work day. I think I'm good.
I'm good. All right, so let's go. Actually, I want to go into because we ended last week with like how to have difficult conversations. And I really like going into that topic because I think the how to do it is one of the most important things, especially because we have so many people with different views, different experiences, um, different ways of like experiencing the world around them, and then also different opinions, right? So to be able to have a conversation with someone that has a different of opinion with you and have a hard conversation and have it go as best as it can without people are going to feel uncomfortable in hard conversations. I think that's just
Yeah,
known, right?
because they are uncomfortable. And I think it's still important to have them. Like I think if you're never feeling uncomfortable interpersonally, that's probably indicative of like that maybe your conversations aren't actually hitting those kinds of spots. Like
Mhm.
we can keep everything really easy. We could spend our time just talking about how cute the dogs are, but it's not real.
Yeah.
Real things in life are difficult, they're complicated. And when we're talking about having difficult conversations, there are different types of it. There are different, like some things are difficult because you have to ask or say no to somebody. There are other things that are difficult because you have to have a conversation about something, but you know that somebody else's views are going to differ.
Mhm.
And there are other conversations that are difficult because maybe you're afraid to disclose something, afraid to share something. And so we have a few different types. And I think that like we should probably pick one to really talk through today. We can get into some of the other ones as well. There are going to be similar threads through all of them, but I think being able to like kind of zero in on one might help to like reduce the overwhelm going into this.
I think so too. And I think the way I was thinking of going about it, because one of the things with every conversation that is difficult has the same things in common, right?
Mhm.
One, and this is where when I think I like said this before, when in skills application, in our skills application group, I actually do go into difficult topics with the clients that are in the group, because you have to learn to accept everyone around you, and not everyone has to have the opinion that you
Yeah.
have and has to live life the way you want them to live life, right? And we
Mhm.
all come from like very different um like things that we want in this life and very different expectations of life. So one of the things that I coach them on a lot of time is first dialectics.
Mhm.
When difficult conversations and dialectics, Lauren, what are dialectics? What is a dialectic?
Well, a dialectic is two things that seem like opposites that can both be true. And
Mhm.
so it's something like this is really coming from the philosophy of dialectics. There are a lot of different kind of views on it. And so obviously we can get into the more Hegelian dialectics, but in the dialectics that we're referring to is really coming from dialectical behavior therapy. And when we're thinking about it in that sense, we're thinking about those two things. It could be something like acceptance and change, two things that seem like opposites that can both be true at the same time, and being able to link those things together. And so the dialectics, kind of thinking about those interpersonal dialectics of like my experience and your experience can both be true.
Mhm.
in this moment, even if they're polar opposites, even if you think, you know, Lauren is like way too fabulous and I think I'm just fabulous enough. Like those things can both be true. And
Or
so I think, yeah. So kind of as we're like holding them kind of hand in hand, being able to really kind of position both those things at the same time, that they don't have to equal each other in order to be valid. We
yeah.
can each have, kind of valid viewpoints. Obviously, there can also be things that are wrong in that too, but this is like being able to kind of theoretically hold both viewpoints.
Yeah, I love that. That's the best way of explaining it. And when I'm like talking about these difficult conversations, I always say it's a dialectic, but and there are many truths that can exist in this room, not just one or two anymore. Now, like the conversation, the last dialectical conversation we had was like in regards to the two presidents that are running right now. So I think that was a thing where I was like, two truths can exist. Both are good and both are bad. Those
Yes.
are the two truths that exist. Both are liked and both are disliked. Both have done great things, both have not done great things. Like those, all of those truths really do exist. So we're not here to debate and argue about whose truth is true and whose truth is not true. Right. So that's one of the ways I try to teach dialectical conversations. And I think with these hard conversations, that is what's the most important thing in the room. It's knowing both truths exist, your truth and the other person's truth. So then that kind of goes into now you start mindfully listening.
Mhm.
When the other person is speaking their truth, it's called mindful listening. So Lauren, what is mindful listening?
So being able to, you're not just there. Sometimes you can be in a conversation, you can just know that the other person's saying words, but actually being able to stay in the conversation, listening to what's being said without judgment. And so let's say something kind of happens in the conversation, and rather than me kind of going like, if you were like, your dog Poppy isn't cute, I may be having the thought, that's so not true.
Mhm.
She's so cute. What are you talking about? And so mindful listening would be bringing myself back, being like, okay, let me kind of pivot back. What else is Lily saying? And being able to hear more and more and being able to stay in the conversation with you. And so one of the like basic levels of validation, level one validation is just being in the same space and room with somebody else. And so when I'm kind of applying that to mindful listening of being able to be in the same room as somebody else and actually be hearing what they're saying. And I might have my own thoughts, experiences of what they're saying, but being able to maintain in a conversation and to
Mhm.
bring myself back when I inevitably get pulled away. We don't have to be 100% all the time. We're not going to be able to do that because we're still humans with our own thoughts, but being able to bring ourselves back to just what's being said. And maybe there's a difference between kind of the way that I'm interpreting it, what's being said. And so paying attention to all of those things. And so a lot of what really what you're talking about is having an orientation coming into the room, which is that, and this is like, other people may say this is kind of where all the other kind of therapy modalities may come in. Maybe somebody else calls it respect, coming in with respect. We call it being dialectical, knowing the other person has their own viewpoint that may differ from my own.
Yeah.
Then when I'm actually in the room, maybe like other people might call that just paying attention. And we might call it mindful listening, of being able to actually be in the same space. It doesn't really matter what words you use. All it matters is like, how are you oriented when you're walking in? And are you actually in the conversation? Or are you having your own conversation? Like I already know what Lily's going to say, so I don't have to listen. And I'm just waiting for this person to prove my point.
Yeah. And the other thing is like and this is like there are people that really do just like to debate, right? They just want to prove the other person wrong. And I think that's the piece where, yeah, it's fun, it's nice. But in that moment, people that just like to debate, they're not actually listening because now they're in their mind like, okay, how you said something that I want to challenge, and I stop listening to everything else that you're saying. And because I'm like, I want to challenge you at that, now I'm thinking of all the things that I can say on how to challenge you, where that's the thing where the urge to challenge people and try to like I don't know how to explain the challenge because challenging is very effective to an extent. And in conversations like that, challenging has a technique. It's not just trying to prove that you know more, that you heard X, Y, and Z on CNN, or you're actually following the new or whatever it might be, right? It's waiting to listen to what they have to say because these
Mhm.
conversations aren't about who they're going to vote for or who's acting in what way. The conversation is about understanding other people and why they're making the decisions that they're trying to have an outcome at the end of the day.
Yes,
And
they
it's
are.
understanding that.
So I think the interesting thing that you're talking about is like being able to know how to, thinking about kind of what your goal is and entering into the conversation. Is my goal to change someone else's view? And or is it to understand where they're coming from? Like whatever our objective is really important. And thinking about like what do we want to what is our end game? Does a relationship matter? Does how I approach this matter to me because I want to have this person in my life at the end of the day?
Yeah.
If not, like it probably doesn't really matter how I approach it if I don't really care. But if I have any kind of semblance of caring about the relationship, then I'm going to want to kind of prioritize that as well of how I'm going about this. And is my objective, yeah, thinking about that objective, it's really hard to actually change somebody's viewpoint. And there also has to be a willingness there. So I think that when we're talking about something as divisive as politics, it's probably pretty rare that someone's going to walk away and be like, now I'm a Democrat, right? Like it doesn't happen. Like people really dig their heels in. And when it comes to values, and so I want to be really specific, like about what I'm actually trying to understand. And if somebody is open to hearing, oh, I really want to know more about this one issue, like I know, like I feel like a lot of people were talking in the recent elections about the different like propositions, like in some for some of those, I was like, oh, I actually do need, I don't know. I don't have information. I'm trying to learn more.
Yeah.
But if I already have, like, if someone was asking me, about my views on something that I've had my same views on for a really long time, someone was asking me about women's rights or something, like, I might have a very specific set of viewpoints. And if someone came up to me and tried to change that, override my viewpoints, that would just be a waste of their time.
Yeah. And I think that's the other piece though, because I have these conversations a lot more often with strangers, interesting enough. Like I'll be standing at the post office waiting for my turn and someone brings up the conversation of politics and interesting enough people have like they disagree with my view. Which I live in a Democrat. Anyways, so um one of the things is it's the willingness to listen, right?
Hmm.
The willingness to listen. And then what I always tell myself, because that relationship to me doesn't matter. And it's not just about politics, it's about so many other things. It's about like sexism, like you said, racism, children, how children are going, our education system, all our healthcare system. There's so many things, so many nuances of conversation that everyone has different beliefs around and different like ideas of what it's like. Um, but one of the objectives that I say of that conversation is not to change anyone's mind, is to understand the other person and for me to be understood.
Yeah.
I want
And
those.
what does being understood mean to you?
So I want the same and that's the thing. I do purposely and intentionally practice listening, practice asking a lot of questions. And a lot of times when people say things that are really against my moral and my value, I get triggered. I know I get triggered because I can feel my heart rate going up. I can notice the thoughts in my mind of like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Like I actually do have that. My face gets hot and I have to take a deep breath and bring myself back down and kind of be like, Lily, just listen.
Yes.
Just listen. This is a human that coexists with you on this earth, whether you like it or not, whether you
Mhm.
believe the way they coexist with you or not is right or wrong. They exist in the same city as you do. Not
Yeah.
even the same world, the same city as you do.
Mhm.
You're not going to be able to change that, man. Like, So we're just trying to have a conversation. And I think once I'm able to get through that hump, it really, the conversation changes every single time. And that's kind of what I mean by in that moment, it's my objective is for me to be heard and for them to be heard, which means when I give them the space to hear me, they actually start asking the same questions in return. And
Mhm.
I do like kind like, and a lot of times my answers are very different because my lifestyle is different. Where I grew up is different. How I grew up is different.
Yeah.
Like I'm very much so like afraid of like dictatorship because I lived in Iran.
Yeah.
I, like, I also went to school in Armenia right after the Soviet. Like they had no water, they had no gas, like they were
Yeah.
poor. Like I've seen other parts of the world that don't live as um I don't want to say luxurious as us, but let's be honest, like we are privileged.
Yeah. There are a lot of like privileges, I think all the also things we take for granted. And so being heard as like that outcome, that seems reasonable, right? I'm not going to go into a conversation with my father, who's like one of the most conservative people I know, and convince him to become a Democrat. That doesn't make sense. And I can also, the other thing to know is how activating are you going to find the conversation? Are you able to hear somebody? Because there are certain conversations like, I can hear people debate about daylight savings time, right? I can hear that debate. I can hear both sides of it. I think we can all agree that it's stupid. But
We can all agree on that, I
yeah,
think.
but that's not really an activating issue. I'm like, yeah, do I find it a little bit annoying? The time changes, like in the scheme of things in the world, that doesn't really activate me in the same way as maybe another topic. And so just thinking about like a lot of this is having your own like kind of mindfulness and emotion self-management to know what is a conversation I can have. There
Mhm.
might be some things that maybe are too close to home to me, or maybe too close to home in this moment in time. There are times when certain conversations are just too heated. And this was like definitely, thinking about, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right? Like that was a moment when that got overturned, like everything was just so heated. I think just being an AFAB person in the United States of just having a lot of emotions around it. Somebody, I couldn't really hear somebody then. And
Yeah,
so now, just thinking about kind of in time, there might be some moments where it's easier to hear something than others, and just being aware of where you are. Sometimes we don't have the luxury, and this is really a luxury, right? Of being able to choose when we have certain conversations and when we don't.
yeah. Yeah, and I that's exactly it. And also you have to bring in the willingness that your intention to change the person's mind, that's the number one thing that activates a conversation and no one gets anything out of it. Nobody. Like if you have the intention to change a person's mind, psychologically and just scientifically, that person is automatically, the ego's kicking in, they get defensive, they automatically want to be like, I'm not wrong, and they want to defend themselves. And that, like, now you're at a state where no one's actually listening, no one's taking in information, and it's just a heightened emotion that you're literally both of you are just speaking emotions. You're not even speaking logic anymore. You're just purely speaking emotions and ego.
Yes. Yes.
It really is the willingness to just let go of trying to change a person's mind and
Mhm.
accept that there are two truths happening in that moment, and you can comfortably express your truth and effectively express your truth. Now, if the other person is not taking it, is getting aggressive, please walk away.
Yeah.
Like,
There are
pers-
few things that are going to bring people back in those moments. If someone's really activated, defenses are going up. Oftentimes at a certain point, we just like think about our own emotional arousal. And if our arousal is too high, like we're going to go into fight or flight, and then no new learning can occur because I'm too activated. So if I'm too activated to actually have a different experience, why am I going to stay in this one?
Mhm.
I'm going to need to address that emotion first and then be able to come back to it. So a lot of like kind of where this is conversation, our conversation is headed is just being able to have the awareness of like, how am I going into this space? If my objective is just to change somebody's mind, I'm not going to be able to really probably have the conversation I want unless someone's like, "Hey, I feel really open to hearing new information. Would you be able to come share with me about," that might not even be a difficult conversation then because you're on the same page going in. It's just if we're on two separate pages and maybe we have to come to an agreement at the end of it, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It's not even agreement, it's finding the two truths and the middle path. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we do all have to coexist together, and we are the ones living together. And it's like, how do you want to live in the same world with somebody? Do you want to constantly live in fighting? It's like coming into a house that's constantly chaotic. Like if you live in a house, and anyone that's lived in a house that's constantly fighting and chaos, you don't want to, you barely want to go home. You try to stay out as much as you can. Like you have stuff in your car that you pretty much live out of your car. You don't try to go home often. So why create a state, a country that you're just constantly fighting with people?
Yeah.
You don't want to stay in that. And it's not just a United States and it's United States of America. By the way, every time I say United States of America, I think of Adriel because he makes fun of me because he's like, "Oh, you're using the whole legal name, United States of America. Like, why can't you just say United States or America?" I'm like, "Bro, I just like to use, I like to say the whole thing."
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, those tough conversations, I think they're beautiful and they do make a difference as long as your intention and objective isn't to make that change. So hopefully we're actually going to start practicing all of these skills slow and steady going into some tough conversations starting. The first step we're going to take, like what we did today, is we're going to start talking about how to have the conversation first before going into having those conversations.
Exactly. And this is something that we do all the time because we're on outside of the podcast, we're on a treatment team together. And in those conversations, when we're talking about cases, talking about clients, like there are times when we present differing opinions and being able to, ask for help from people, knowing you're going to get different information and being able to synthesize it and to be able to walk away and know what to do with it. Like there are times where I bring something into team and maybe feel very, very, very strongly like, we're referring somebody potentially to a higher level of care. And then another team member comes in and is like, I don't really know if that's needed. Maybe you need to try doing something a little bit different here and being able to hold that truth, even though like maybe at the end of the day, I still do the thing that I came in with, but even just entering that information into the conversation is important to be able to start to shift kind of how we're thinking and so that we don't think that we have the absolute hold on truth.
Yeah.
There are multiple ways to solve a problem.
Yeah, and also I think it the truth sometimes is connected to an emotion, and there might have been truth in the past, but if you're open to hearing someone else and starting to try to practice seeing it from that perspective, you might see a different truth that's happening now outside of the emotion that came from a memory or a past. And that's a beautiful analogy and example. Like in treatment team, if I bring something, a lot of times I'm bringing it with my own emotion connected to it. And so when another person's like, I have a different truth that like I think you're not seeing it because you're really, really emotionally connected to this like past memory of a client that you had that you thought that client would like connect to this. And so I do have to take a look at myself and meet myself where I am now with the situation that's in front of me now versus what it had to do in the past.
Exactly.
I
And
agree.
so these are, as we're like kind of this is unfolding on the podcast, I think for us to also take notice even more so just in our lives of how we approach these difficult conversations. Because oftentimes like treatment team is not like it's not like a soup. It's enjoyable. Like I enjoy being there, but it's not like we're having easy conversations. These are like the things that are the toughest moments of our week that we're bringing in. And so I'm sure we'll bring in some examples from that in the coming weeks of just how we actually navigate it day to day.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we're gonna end it there. We hope everyone enjoyed our how to have difficult conversations episode. Happy Thursday, and we will see you all next week.